the free market to people like John Kerry means he can award his brother-in-law or whoever, crony son of a bitch that he knows, a $5 billion contract to dig holes in some village to get the fucking cobalt out, the son of a bitch.
December 6th, 2020, episode number 22, season 2 of the Barney and Clyde Show. On the lineup today, Republic versus Democracy, the Electoral College, scrap it or keep it. Maybe someday we'll try a free market, the life and legacy of Dr. Walter E. Williams. I'll decide that for myself, thank you. The Great Reset, the Buy Local Movement, and individual choice. Welcome back to B&C, everybody.
Welcome back to the Digital Libation Station, Barney Quick. Yeah. So, people who are new, just really quickly, Barney is our resident conservative. I'm a libertarian, and we take the weighty matters of the day, the things that are facing the nation's plate, and we dissect them and discuss them from a conservative and a libertarian perspective, as well as trying to see other perspectives there as well and empathize with those. And we always have ourselves a tasty beverage when we're down at Barney's actual libation station, but over video chat, we've been keeping that tradition alive. I hope you're keeping the tradition alive. Am I speaking out of turn?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Okay, what are you libating today?
Well, I'll tell you what. I've got some Bolthouse Farms Daily Greens.
Oh yeah.
And at 150 calories, it's going to give me 2 grams of my protein, daily requirement of protein. Vitamin C, 40%, 6% of my calcium, and 10% of my potassium.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Yeah, veggies in a cup.
Bolthouse Farms, I've had their stuff a few times over the years. I haven't tried this one. A few weeks ago, I tried this carrot juice turmeric kind of thing. Now, I'm a big fan of just pure carrot juice. I think it's wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
But this was like, oh. Sure. I was drinking it, and I thought, I am damn glad that this is at least good for me, because otherwise it would be an exercise in complete
sport. Man, I don't know. Turmeric is just, to me, just foul and disgusting. Like it's a wonderful thing to use for coloring dishes, but man, it tastes terrible. In all but the smallest doses, I just can't handle it. So, which leads me to wonder if it's really that good for you. You got a, I don't know how many 100 million year old device in your mouth called your tongue that's evolved to detect the things that are good and the things that are bad. And if something's really bad,
But hey, I'm pleased to report this is good.
Nice.
This is going to work out well. Okay, good. What do you got?
I've got I may have had this on here before, but I've got a Goose Island Solo.
Okay.
So this is a low alcohol beer. We've talked a couple times about like low alcohol, no alcohol beers. This one's about 3% alcohol, so I can have a couple of these without getting loopy. It's about, I don't know, it's probably about the same, a little less alcohol than like a Budweiser, I think. So like a lot of craft beers around 5 to 8%. So that's quite a lot of alcohol to consume in a sitting, and you get pretty loopy pretty fast. So something like this, I can kick back and enjoy one of these, and I don't get all toasty.
Got these 3 segments here. The first one: Republic versus Democracy, the Electoral College, scrap it or keep it. A lot of strong feelings out there about that. How about you? Do you feel strongly about it, Clyde?
Well, I want to take the anti-position here, just for the sake of argument, and maybe do some thought experiments. I think that the Electoral College is a brilliant idea. If we look at our government the way it's supposed to be structured, rather, it works a lot better than people think it would when they think of our government as a top-down, single, cohesive nation, when really our nation is designed to be sort of a federation of independent states that, are aligned around a single document, our Constitution, right? That one thing that is a limit of what the government can do. So I think when you take it in that context, that each state getting a vote for sort of the chairman of that executive committee makes a lot more sense than a popular vote. And I think that they took careful measure to design something that would make sure that all of the states had a voice in that decision and not just the population centers.
But you said you were going to argue, or at least look at the argument that direct vote for president.
Well, I'm going to poke a couple holes. I'm going to raise a couple questions about the Electoral College and if it couldn't be modified in some ways. And then I want you to try to poke holes in that scenario for me and see if I'm deranged or what. But let's not go there yet. Let's talk about how does the damn thing work even. I think a lot of people don't even understand what it is. There's the Electoral College, and then there's the electoral system, and those are sort of different but overlapping. And I'm not entirely sure I understand it top down because there's so many moving parts with all 50 states having some different set of processes. But
don't forget, we went for 6+ years between the end of the Revolutionary War, 12+ years if you consider going back to the birth of our nation in 1776, up to the late 1780s with Articles of Confederation, and then people said this is just not enough. We're going to need a constitution. Otherwise, we really got 13 sovereign entities going here. In all matters constitutional, I always go back to my hero, James Madison, who was very worried about the concept of factions, movements within society that, as he says in Federalist Number 10, are, quote, united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. People get so heated about one particular matter of the day or something, and want to move government to deal with that in a certain way. And he was saying that's why he envisioned the House of Representatives as being directly elected by people within a district. But then the Senate, and don't forget the Senate up until 1913 was state legislatures elected senators, and the idea was that the Senate would be where the interests of the states were brought to the federal government,
right?
For
sort of
consideration.
Much like a nation within the United Nations or a nation within the European Union would bring its interests to the group.
Yeah. And that didn't change until that terrible year, 1913, in which the Senate began to get directly elected by citizens, just like the House. The income tax was instituted, and the Federal Reserve was founded.
Oh my gosh, what a year!
Yeah. So, but the idea being that he wanted to do as much as possible to ensure that we were a republic rather than a democracy. That these factions could lead to mob rule. A majority rule that is, that all sounds very nice. Well, the majority ruled this way or that way. But if you ride so roughshod over the minority's interests that they're completely without a say in things,
right? In a real democracy, a pure democracy, all of the residents of Barney's neighborhood could all get together and vote on how they're going to divvy up Barney's stuff, right? I'm just going to take all Barney's stuff and steal his house and all that kind of stuff. But the majority voted, so Barney, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So the republic system puts some checks on that. It's still actually it's not bulletproof.
Since the time of the founders, two great things happened during the latter half of the 19th century: urbanization and industrialization. And particularly urbanization, you had these big centers of population, and sometimes some states had a heavy concentration of those, and then you had states like, say, Wyoming or Montana that had a very sparse and dispersed population. And their interests with a direct vote are going to get the short end of the stick vis-a-vis densely populated states with lots of urban centers like California or the eastern Acela corridor.
The argument is for a lot of conservatives, or well, let's say conservatives, is that if we go to a popular vote, then the counties of Los Angeles and New York will decide the president every time. Every time. There's no way the rest of the population is going to, or the middle states are going to overturn that. Every single time they'll decide the president, and those are heavily left-leaning areas, and so we're going to have one party in power at the top of the executive branch forever if we have a popular vote. And I think that's why the left side of the aisle tends to favor the popular vote, because they bloody well know that.
Yeah.
So the way it sort of is designed to work, though, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but each state, both of the major political parties, so the Republicans and Democrats, every election year, they vote on their group of electors, right? So they have these people who are electors. And so somebody put it that when you're voting for a candidate for president in that state, really you're voting for the elector or the set of electors. So you vote for the Republican candidate, you're really casting a vote for the Republican electors. Yeah. Because they're going to put a ballot in the box, and those ballots are the ones that are going to end up choosing the president. Now, as I understand it, all states have a process or even a law that says that the popular vote of the people within the state, the electors for that candidate, will check off their vote for the president that matches the popular vote of the state. The Constitution of the United States doesn't insist that they do that. That's a choice that all states have made, is to honor the public popular vote and force their electors to do that. And I believe that's the case in all states. So that's the process. There are certain key dates and key milestones within the process. I think on December 14th.
14th, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, that's the meeting of the electors. And that's when they cast their ballots. December 23rd is the deadline for receipt of all those ballots. And then on January 6th, they count the electoral ballots.
Yeah.
And then January 20th is Inauguration Day.
That's the process.
So we have a popular vote of sorts. So everybody has the popular vote to vote within their state, right? To vote within their group.
Yeah.
And again, as a federation of states, we vote for, here in Indiana, we vote together, popular vote for whoever gets the most. That's who Indiana chooses. That's who the electors for Indiana are going to have to put in the box.
Yeah.
That gives us a little bit more say as flyover country, as not a hugely densely populated area, but it's still mostly the popular vote. I think the critique of the left that the popular vote isn't honored is kind of shallow. This might have been a more dramatic example of the popular vote being widely different than the electoral vote. But for the most part, I think it's pretty close, and it is a popular vote of sorts.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that's been getting under the skin of progressives, Democrats, I guess I'm talking about, in the 21st century so far, is that Republican presidential victories have all been at the Electoral College level. They've all come up short in terms of popular vote.
Yeah, which, in this century has only been two, right? That's been George W. and
he got 2000 and 2004.
Yeah,
and then the very stable genius in 2016. Yeah.
So both of Bush's wins were electoral wins and contrary to the popular vote. I know the first one was.
Yeah, let's look that up here. Bush improved on his 270 electoral votes in 2000 by winning 286 electoral votes. The popular vote also broke for Bush in 2004.
In 2004, okay.
Yeah.
So he won the electoral vote, but not the popular vote in 2000.
Right.
And got both in 2004.
Yeah.
And then Trump got electoral only in 2016. Okay. You can critique that, but it's done what it's designed to do, right? To allow the minority party to actually have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Which I would think is something that the left would be for.
Yeah.
Okay. So, how do you feel about the structure overall? What's your opinion on the Electoral College, and what's your view?
I think it's absolutely essential to the decentralization of power at the federal level. It's like I say, my go-to guy for all these kinds of things is James Madison, who wanted a bicameral legislature, 3 distinct branches of the federal government, and this electoral college to keep power from getting too concentrated in any one area.
Mm-hmm. So, as far as concentrations of power go, here's where my critique is going to start. And
Okay.
Again, you feel free to poke holes in it. All right.
Okay.
So one thing I want to stress, though, one thing I am not is in favor of the popular vote for president. I'm not making that argument, but I'm going to highlight some things I think might be shortcomings of the current process.
Okay.
We talked about the electoral process and what the electors are and what they do and how they're supposed to vote and how they're restrained, but we didn't talk about the scenario where the election gets thrown into the House. So in that case, there's no clear winner, or there's a problem with the election, neither candidate gets 270, right? If neither candidate gets 270 electoral votes, it gets thrown into the House, and in that case, each state has 1 vote, right?
Yeah.
So in that scenario, the 39 million people in California have about the same amount of power as the 578,000 in Wyoming. So, I mean, 578,000 in the entire state, that's fewer people than the population of the city of Indianapolis by about 35%. That's not a lot of people versus the 5th largest economy in the world, California. But that seems to be a shortcoming of the process. Again, that's a rare case scenario, but in the event that it does happen, I think the risk is pretty big.
A presidential election going to the House of Representatives has only happened twice, and both times were in the early 19th century, the election of 1800 and the election of 1824. In the last 4 years, there's been a movement afoot among Democrats to claim that James Madison said that the Electoral College was evil. No. He wrote a letter about the Electoral College in 1823, and what he said was that the mechanism whereby an election in a situation where neither candidate got a majority of the votes in the Electoral College, that's what Madison was criticizing. The comment wasn't really an indictment of the electoral system itself, but he was just concerned about concentrations of power, that state delegations would have to vote 1 vote per state, and once again, the minority would not get the kind of representation that it ought to.
So Madison and I have the same concern in that regard.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like you do.
Okay, all right, I'll accept that. That sounds good.
Okay.
All right, so my other critique, and I will not claim credit for this. I heard this from a Harvard law professor named Lawrence Lessig, and
Okay.
He made the statement that that there still can be these things called rogue electors, and I'm not really sure if I understand how this is possible, because there are 538 electors. 84 of them are controlled by laws currently on the books, stating that they must vote with the popular vote,
Mm-hmm.
and 454 remain free to vote how they want.
Okay.
And it's a matter of protocol that they vote with the state, with the popular vote, but that they don't have to.
They could get right up to the moment of casting their ballot and change their mind. Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
And I don't know how big of a threat that actually is, or what would happen to somebody who decided to do that, but it doesn't seem like there's anything that's illegal or anything about that. So,
well, it's kind of a risk, but if we made them vote, the Electoral College becomes nothing more than a rubber stamp for the popular vote.
Yeah. Well, it's a popular vote of sorts, yeah. But it's a popular vote amongst the states, which could still differ from the popular vote of all of the people in the nation in aggregate. Because that's the way they're selected now, because as a matter of protocol, these other 454 free electors are still casting their votes for the popular vote within their state, and we're still getting flipped outcomes.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point of the whole organization, or the whole process, as we spoke about, is to keep the concentrated, most populated areas from deciding the election every time, right? New York and Los Angeles, basically, in our case. So we see those blue states, New York and California, they're almost not in play, because they're like, especially California with 55 electoral votes. It's a huge win, but it's not in play. It's not going to go red. So we shift away how do I want to say this? Instead of it being New York and California that have the power in the election, it switches to the 4 or 5 or 6 swing states that could flip one way or the other. So the concentration of power becomes, Ohio, Pennsylvania, I don't know, what are the other big swing states, maybe Florida. So instead of having 4 or 5 states that are the most populated, that are the concentrations of power, then the ones that can flip are the concentrations, right? Mm-hmm. So it still seems like we've just shifted, not really solved that problem. It's I think it's better, but there's still a lot of holes in the boat.
So I guess maybe what we're looking at is a considering the possibility, perhaps even an acknowledgement, an agreement that the Electoral College could use some reforming.
So, on that note, I want to introduce you, if you haven't been already, to the idea of fractional allocation of electoral votes. Okay.
Okay.
And this is so we talked about Lawrence Lessig, and he was recently in a Soho Forum debate on this issue with Richard A. Epstein.
Okay.
Who I admire a lot, and was just waiting for Epstein to just trounce this guy. I think they both did really well. But anyway, I think Lessig made a really interesting point here about fragmenting those electoral votes. And again, it may just turn it into a popular vote. And I want you to poke holes in the theory here for me. I might not be smart enough to do it myself. But, okay. So California's population is 39 million people, right? So let's say 20% of those people vote Republican, right? That's a blue state. It's always going to be blue. all 55 of their electoral votes go to the Democrat. Okay. But if you had a fractional system, if 20% of California's 39 million popular votes went to the Republican, then they could be awarded 11 of those electoral votes, 20% of the electoral votes, which puts California back in play for Republicans. Republicans are going to start campaigning there again. And there's a lot of flyover country in California. A lot of it's really rural. There's a lot of farmland and stuff like that. That's most of California, really. And there are a lot of Republicans in California. They're just not in the concentrated areas like L.A. So I've got a clip here, if you don't mind taking the time to listen to part of the Soho Forum debate when Mr. Lessig makes this case.
If it's true, the national popular vote would lead candidates to worry only about the cities. The same logic would say that in states like Pennsylvania, candidates would only worry about the cities too. But that's not true. The data that John Corzine has put together demonstrates that in states like Pennsylvania, campaigns happen everywhere, proportionate to the people who are there. They try to win votes in every single corner of the state, and that's the same thing that would happen if we had national popular vote. Okay, but even if you reject national popular vote, which is the core argument that Richard is making, there is no reason to reject the proposal I want to give you right now. And that proposal says, okay, keep the allocation of electoral votes as it is, but allocate those electoral votes proportionally at the state level, fractionally. Okay, that's a lot of words. Let me just put it in a single picture. So in the state of Montana, if a Democrat got 35.4% of the vote, the popular vote, the Democrat would get 1.062 electoral votes. So what that does is means that every place you compete, you have a chance to get an electoral vote. And what that means is that every state is in play. The president is eager to get votes from Kentucky or from Pennsylvania or from California or from New York. Every state is in play because every state vote would count. And the president would care about votes from everywhere. Every vote could matter almost equally. The thing about that solution is that it still embraces what Richard thinks is important, that small states keep a certain advantage. It's not one person, one vote. They have more electors per person than large states. But here's the politics of the current reality of these small state systems. Small states right now are equal politically. There are, among the 5 smallest states, 5 solid red states, 5 solid blue states. So you could have this system to allocate electors proportionally, keeping a benefit to the small states, but not benefit one party because of that, keeping a federalist structure and keeping the opportunity for innovation at the federal level.
Okay, so that's the end of this fractional pitch there. So I thought that was an interesting...
It intrigues me. It has great appeal. One thing I would say about it is, and you help me out here, demographics and their political preferences do shift. For instance, we spent a fair amount of time talking about California. There was a time when it was a somewhat red state. At the height of the hippie and student radical era in the 1966, it elected Ronald Reagan to 2 terms, and all kinds of upheavals, socio-cultural and political upheavals were going on. But he got elected twice, and you've on up until the end of the 20th century, you had Governor Pete Wilson and
Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger in the early part of this century.
So we have had Republican, a stronger Republican, or consider how the fact that Donald Trump last month did better with blacks and Latino voters than anybody thought he was going to. So demographics do shift, and we can't always anticipate how they're going to. And what would Lessig's proposal? Are there built-in ways to keep it flexible enough to account for that? Or maybe his system just does as a
well, I don't know if it's his system,
the way it's set up.
But it intrigues me because it gives, like in a state like California, that's pretty much always blue. Again, we can go back 50 years and call it purple then. But again, also there's like, Ronald Reagan and Schwarzenegger don't count because those are famous people. Famous people just get elected.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what every political party should do from now on. Is just run the most famous person that they can hold down.
Yes.
But anyway, it just that in California, it would give Republicans that live there a voice in the federal matter, and like here in Indiana, which we're almost always red, it would give Democrats a voice in the matter. We're a little bit more purple than say California, but those states that never flip, those people in those states, like he said, every state's in play. Every person is has that voice. The candidates are going to campaign in those areas, and they can't weasel out like, okay, we've got California, so we don't really have to actually do all the stuff that Californians expect us to do because we've got their votes anyway because we have a D at the end of our name. It just, I don't know, it feels like it's going to make people more accountable.
It makes presidential candidates take every voter and every voting segment more seriously.
I think so.
Okay.
And maybe a popular vote would do the same thing. So I would love to know, like, if anyone out there who's watching or listening wants to chime in and tell us what you think. If you think that's the biggest load of horse crap you've ever heard, or if you think it's a brilliant idea, or you have your own brilliant idea, man, we'd love to hear them.
Absolutely, please chime in in the comment thread under our YouTube channel or our Facebook page.
Right, and you're only going to get that if you pound that subscribe button. So
you bet.
So pound it.
Okay. How are we doing here, Clyde?
I think we beat that one to death. I think we need to move on for the sake of time.
Okay. Next up is a look at the life and legacy of what I consider one of the towering figures in the defense of human liberty. He was Walter E. Williams. He passed away this week. He was an economics professor at George Mason University. That was his day gig. He also wrote a syndicated column and guest hosted for radio hosts once in a while, talk show host. For me and Clyde, we got a lot of Venn diagram overlap on this one because we both just revere him. And he just brought a clarity and a common sense and a concise way of articulating what economic liberty is all about. That it's just incredibly rare.
Yeah.
Let's just examine his life a little. He was born in 1936 in Philadelphia. The father left the family when he was at an early age.
I think 3 years old or something like that.
Yeah. He grew up in the same neighborhood with the comedian, now disgraced comedian Bill Cosby, and some of the characters that Bill Cosby used in his comedy sketches, like Weird Harold and Fat Albert. Mm-hmm. They all ran the streets together, and he did a little college out in California. Went out there to live with his father, as a matter of fact, which I thought was interesting. But and then he came back and drove a taxi cab for a few years as his job. Got married to the woman who was his loving wife up until his passing the other day. I mean, she survives him, and while he was still driving a taxi. But then he decided to hunker down and get serious about his academic career. And he went back out to UCLA and got a master's and a PhD in economics. And that's where he met his lifelong friend, Thomas Sowell. And the two of them, we should probably, just because the nature of 2020 America being what it is, both of those men are black.
So you know what I think is really interesting here, Barney, is that you got that far in to this praise of this man. This guy who's done so much for the field of economics, and this person that we revere, and you got that far in, and you totally forgot to mention that he's black.
Yeah, because
you forget that shit. You're supposed to forget that shit. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's just like the guy is just he's just somebody who could see the world the way it actually works. And he did right by himself, and he pulled himself out of the ghetto and made a good life. And he saw what were the inputs to people not succeeding in the areas where he was from, and that's what led to his writing, I think his cornerstone work was The State Against Blacks, the book The State Against Blacks, and the documentary
Yeah.
that went
Now,
along
to
with
be
it.
sure, yeah, he was not he was not without being conscious of race himself. As a young man, he leaned left. He later on said that as a young man he had preferred Malcolm X to Martin Luther King as a civil rights icon.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was in the army in the early '60s and stationed in Korea, he wrote a letter to President John F. Kennedy. Complaining about systemic racism in the federal government, and particularly in the military. And so that was a very prominent aspect of his worldview early on. But he met Thomas Sowell, and Thomas Sowell was already starting to lean rightward or
have a
and as those two intellectually
transformation.
matured, as the two of them achieved their intellectual maturity, they came to look very closely at what it is that really happens in an economic exchange, as opposed to what anybody thinks ought to happen. Yeah. And like you say, he did this series, NPR or National Broadcasting series on the state against blacks, and he and Sowell and those who have followed in their wake came to see that government subsidies and rent control and minimum wage were ways to elbow out the most economically vulnerable among us.
Yeah.
Pretty much what that means is young minority people.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. His take was that the first rung on the ladder for anyone that doesn't have access to high education is access to getting work experience. And that putting barriers in front of that access was detrimental to the development of those young people seeking that access. And that that specifically the minimum wage law would basically price out those people from being employable, that they wouldn't be allowed to use when the state has already given a group of people terrible educational opportunities, and through corrupt government policies that really did discriminate against blacks and concentrated them into specific areas. So the state puts them in specific housing and gives them poor educational opportunities. And then they say, well, you're not allowed to use the one bargaining chip you have left, and that's the price at which you sell your labor. You must sell it at a higher rate, and that's the point where the white kids worked at. You know what I mean? So people had no incentive to hire blacks if there really was a systemic racism, and certainly at the time when Walter Williams was a young man, that was pretty rampant. What incentive did somebody have to hire the black person and start breaking down those barriers if they could exercise their prejudice and hire white people with educations for the same rate?
Yeah, he was particularly eloquent in the area of pointing up the immorality of redistribution, one of my very favorite quotes of his. But let me offer you my definition of social justice. I keep what I earn, and you keep what you earn. Do you disagree? Well, then tell me how much of what I earn belongs to you and why.
Yeah.
And as we said at the outset, like you say, it took me a long time to take note of the fact that he was black, but this is universally applicable. It is in particular applicable to the black community, but it's applicable anywhere among any demographic. This kind of thing. And he was also, and as a social conservative, I take note of the fact that he had things to say about character and developing yourself as a person.
Right.
One of his other big quotes was, here's the formula for getting out of poverty. Graduate from high school. Get married to your sweetheart and don't have babies with that person until you do. Take any job to get started in the job market and save and invest, mm-hmm. and that's going to stand anybody in good store.
Yeah. I think that he was a very, very good role model for moral living, and as and like you said just a minute ago, he's pointed out the immorality of redistribution. I mean, it shouldn't be hard for us to get to the concept that it's wrong to take things from people without asking, right?
Yes,
and
taxation is that because the government has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force.
And it's still wrong for you to take things from other people if you can do good things with those resources. I can take your money and do lots of good things with it, but it's yours. It belongs to you. It is morally wrong for me to take it from you.
Yeah, and he came up with a formulation during when this country was debating the affordable unquote Care Act during the Obama era. I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but really not much. Suppose you and I are walking down the street together and we come upon a person who's obviously in dire circumstances. They're in bad health or seriously injured or something, and they're obviously destitute. If I pull a gun on you and say, give me some money to get this person some help, we can agree that that's a dastardly act. I have no right to do that to you.
Right.
Why is it any less dastardly if it's the government pulling the gun?
Right. I for one, and you for two, can see that there's no difference there. It's a matter of principle.
Yeah.
But I've got a couple Walter Williams clips if you
sure
care to listen to them.
When I was a kid growing up in the project, I didn't have much time for games. I worked since I was 10 years old. I shined shoes, I delivered packages, I washed dishes at Horn and Hardart. But the kids today are different. They can't find work, so they play basketball and maybe dream of making the Philadelphia 76ers. Back in 1948, before dramatic increases in the minimum wage law, black youth unemployment was 9.4%. Today, it stays at 50% or more. That isn't because employers have become more racist. We can't even blame today's black youth unemployment on recession. No, the culprit here is the minimum wage law.
The minimum wage law is telling our young people that if they can't produce $3.35 an hour of goods or services, then they are not worthy of a job at all. This is so because the minimum wage law requires every employer to pay a worker at least $3.35 an hour, no matter how unskilled that worker may be. However, the businessman has to look at more than that $3.35 an hour. He also has to pay Social Security, unemployment compensation, and fringes such as insurance. So the actual cost to the employer is around $4 an hour, even for the lowest skilled worker.
A company goes financially backward if it has to pay an employee more than that employee is producing in value per hour.
Yeah, they're simply not going to do that.
Yeah.
And if the value is marginal, even if they're employing that person at a slightly lower rate than is profitable, you don't want to run very narrow margins because that means the margin of error is not big enough.
Yeah.
All right, let's go with another couple small ones here.
For instance, the federal government not too long ago ordered a raid on a garment sweatshop in New York City. The shop had been paying an elderly woman only $1 an hour, and some kids were working in the shop for similar wages. The owner was fined, and he had to stop what he had been doing. When the social do-gooders come back to the sweatshop, they'll look around and congratulate themselves on the fact that everyone in the shop is now earning $3.35 an hour. What these do-gooders don't see is whatever happened to that old lady who was making $1 an hour. She might have become a bag lady roaming the streets for all we know. Those kids who had jobs at the shop are probably standing on some street corner stealing hubcaps or worse. The minimum wage law does something else too. It reduces the cost to an employer of engaging in plain racial discrimination. If a businessman has to pay any worker $3.35 an hour, assuming all the job applicants have the same qualifications, then the cost of choosing white workers over black ones is zero. If there were no minimum wage law, poor black job seekers could engage in the age-old strategy of offering their services at a slightly lower rate. If a black worker agreed to work for $3 an hour, while white workers wouldn't accept anything less than $4 an hour, it would pay the employer to hire the black workers, regardless of his feelings. But the minimum wage law prohibits low-skilled blacks from offering that kind of competitive advantage. In South Africa, the world capital of racism, the white labor unions favor the minimum wage law because that law helps hold together racist apartheid laws that would otherwise break down. For example, back in 1972, a black South African home construction worker would make 40 cents an hour, while a white construction worker would earn $1.90 for doing the same job. South African home builders had a lot of incentive to ignore the segregation laws and hire the lower-priced black labor. What happened is that the white construction unions began insisting on an equal pay for equal work law. Then the South African builder would have no special reason to hire black workers, and he wouldn't hire them.
I think that South Africa example is so clear. You know what I mean? It's just that is the origin of a lot of labor unions, was specifically so that white workers could
elbow out minorities.
Minorities who were selling labor at a lower rate.
Yep. He paved the way for so many great black conservatives who have come along in his way. Star Parker with her Urban Cure organization, and Jason Riley, whose great book Stop Helping Us.
Jason Riley is how I actually found Walter Williams when I was kind of starting to tiptoe into that kind of reading, you know, and it was just great stuff.
So Walter Williams, one of the towering figures in the defense of economic liberty. How are we doing here time-wise?
Yeah, let's do one more short Walter Williams on
all right.
minimum wage.
Fine with me.
It's only like a minute long.
All right.
A lot of good-hearted people advocate the minimum wage law as a way to end poverty and protect the worker from what they see as exploitation.
Well, you know the minimum wage law is not an anti-poverty device. If it were, we could eliminate poverty in Bangladesh just by raising the minimum wage there to $5 an hour.
As for protecting the worker, the minimum wage law only protects those skilled enough to produce at least $3.35 an hour of goods. People who aren't skilled enough to produce that value of goods are thrown out of work. They earn $0 an hour.
One of my favorite quotes from Walter Williams was actually from this here too. I think we barely heard a segment of it, but he said, when do-gooders set out to protect people, often they never see the victims of their handiwork.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, Walter Williams will be missed. It's very, very sad to lose him.
Yeah. Hope somebody can come along, rise in our midst to be as equally an eloquent defender of freedom.
I have my concerns that there will be in short supply.
Yeah. Now we've got segment 3 today. I'll decide that for myself. Thank you. And this is a great segue from Walter Williams, because a human being ought to be able to decide for him or herself what he or she is going to produce and consume in this world. It's a basic type of freedom. But central planners of one kind and another are very big on deciding for us on the basis of fairness what we should and should not be able to consume and produce. There's a more than a little virtue signaling involved in the buy local movement, don't get your coffee from a chain place like Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts. Get it from our small shop. And that's just one example, but
if your place has good coffee, we'll go.
Yeah. Well, let's just quote Williamson. There is a competition in the market, but its salient characteristic is cooperation. Through the market, we solve social problems together on a voluntary, collaborative basis. One of the consequences is that cattlemen in Texas have an interest in the prosperity of the steakhouse patrons in Manhattan, and vice versa. The people who want you to believe otherwise are the same ones who want you to give up Bordeaux wine for wine made in Missouri or Oregon or Illinois, i.e. people who are not to be trusted. The relationship between small business and big business is complicated. Some small businesses have big business competitors that make life hard for them. But a big share of small businesses have big share of small businesses have as their single biggest customer a bigger business. That's true for businesses from machine shops that make components for complex manufactured goods to service providers such as diesel mechanics and landscapers. There are thousands of very wildly profitable businesses across this country that you may never have heard of because they don't have anything on the shelf in Walmart with their company name on it, but you use their products every day. Small businesses rely on big business in other critical ways too. Online markets such as Amazon and Etsy help small business people connect with customers all over the world, and global firms such as FedEx provide them important logistics and shipping services. I like my local coffee shop and the other locally owned businesses in my neighborhood. I hope they do so well that the folks who own them buy Italian cars.
Yeah.
You know,
I hope they do so well that they become big businesses. I mean, as they grow and open new stores and become a chain.
You bet. As Williamson says, there's a far more complex relationship between all the businesses that go into bringing a product to the shelf of your local Walmart or to the cash out area at your local coffee shop, whether it's local or chain.
Well, hold on 1 second. I want to point out the absurdity of being a local purist. Okay, and if you're saying try to buy local when you can, right, and when it makes sense for you, I'm all for that, and I try to do that too. But if you go to the local coffee shop, I guarantee you're getting imported coffee. I mean, we live in Indiana. Coffee don't grow here, dude. You know?
Exactly. To quote Williamson once again, I like my local coffee shop, and I'm pretty sure that it does not buy its coffee locally because I don't live in Colombia or Brazil or Vietnam, and it doesn't buy its go-to cut from a local maker since it's not in the shadow of a paper goods factory. Its lease is probably held by an out-of-town entity, and its espresso machine probably came from Italy or Germany, maybe Hong Kong. So yes, we're interconnected. It's a global economy. Whether you're a little corner shop, you own it, or it's a franchise of a big chain.
Yeah, and a giant tariff on coffee. I don't know that would spark innovation to develop coffee in colder climates, if that even be possible.
Yeah,
or practical even. But it would keep a lot of small businesses from opening up and selling coffee. You know, either the coffee that they sold would be cost prohibitive. I mean, in any case, they either wouldn't be able to open up because it'd be so expensive to supply, or two, they'd have to. It would cost them an arm and a leg to get it, and the final product would be enormous, and there'd just be fewer of them.
Yeah.
And I'd buy less coffee at, it's already $5 a cup at Starbucks. Imagine when it's 8, 9, 10, 12.
Yeah. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, there's a notion afoot called the Great Reset. And the World Economic Forum and the United Nations are in on this. And they meet at Davos, Switzerland, and talk about this kind of thing. And in June, the World Economic Forum had said the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts to working conditions. Every country from the United States to China must participate, and every industry from oil to gas to tech must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism. The Business Roundtable got in on all this when they kind of thumbed their nose at Milton Friedman and said that a company has more responsibility, that has a wider array of stakeholders than just its shareholders, and has a obligation to give back to the community and all this kind of thing. And recently, Democrat policy makers have not really they've been relatively quiet about this. Biden hasn't even had too much to say about it on the campaign trail, or since he's been elected, since he's been president-elect. But the guy he's picked to be his climate czar, who's utterly convinced that the global climate's in some kind of trouble that requires our urgent reversal of our advancement as a human species. John Kerry, he says, he was asked by a panel host at the World Economic Forum whether Great Reset supporters were expecting too much too soon from the new president. He says, to answer your question, no, you're not expecting too much. He says, and I think it will happen with greater speed and greater intensity than a lot of people might imagine. In effect, the citizens of the United States have just done a great reset. And it's not enough just to rejoin the Paris Climate Accords for the United States. It's not enough for us to do the minimum of what Paris requires. This is going to be central planning on steroids. The pointy heads of Davos and are just licking their chops to institute this great reset.
Yeah. First of all, it's too much to expect too soon to expect Joe Biden to find his own way to the bathroom. And two, it's like you said, these. I'm gonna do some lefty talk here for a second, but these privileged elites who think that they know better than people how to run their lives, and that they this crisis, and it's not just the climate crisis that they're talking about. They're also talking about the economic crisis, and not just what COVID has presented, which is it presented nothing. The economic crisis has been brought to you by government policy, not by COVID-19. But anyway, the idea that they can recreate economic structures and that they have to do it because of the failures of capitalism, I think is just abjectly absurd. I mean, anyone can go and look at the rates of poverty as they continue to fall to record numbers, and we've been cutting them in half over like the last 10 years or so, and they hit an all-time low, and world poverty hit an all-time low in 2019. Now, obviously,
Yes.
COVID-19, situations definitely, put a dent in that success, which we can recover from if they get the fuck out of the way.
Yeah.
But these people are perpetuating an enormous lie that capitalism has failed people. Capitalism is the single most unique blessing to people on this to poverty on this earth. And what happens is that these, like you said, these pointy-headed pieces of garbage humans think that they don't think that they know better, but they do know how to extract wealth from people and shuffle it up to the top. They know how to keep their private planes fueled. They know how to create foundations and launder money, and I just can't say fuck these people enough, because they're gonna destroy the lives of real people. They're going to destroy the economies of nations and enrich themselves doing it, and it's disgusting. These people are gross.
Well, and to get back to the economic common sense that we were talking about in the Walter Williams segment, dense and cheap forms of energy are far more advantageous to human well-being than diffuse and intermittent and expensive forms. And you cannot make them less expensive without government coercion and tampering with the free market. And
the government coercion is going to actually make them more expensive, or they're going to make other things more expensive as a result. The price controls and production controls are never going to work. They never have. And I've got a quick clip from Mr. Kerry himself on the Great Reset podcast. The Great Reset podcast presented to you by the World Economic Forum. So if you go on Apple Podcasts and you type the word "great," just the word "great," guess what the number one hit is? The Great Reset. Not this podcast, just the phrase, the Great Reset. Maybe that's organic. Maybe that's what people are talking about. But maybe you want a great Star Trek fan podcast, or you wanted a great recipes podcast, or nope, you're going to get a giant dose of commie fucking propaganda instead.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, I haven't had my dinner yet. I'm ready for this.
Okay.
Right.
And I think that can be done. Thirdly, we've got to deal with climate change. Climate change is the biggest single climate crisis, not change, is the biggest single economic opportunity the world has ever had. We have 4.5 billion users of energy today. We're going up to 9 billion in the course of the next 30 years. We have the ability to go to 9. We have 1 billion people who don't even have electricity. There's a monumental set of opportunities in building infrastructure, in pushing the technology curve, which may well be the solution through negative emissions technology to the challenge of climate. No one is pursuing that with the kind of fervor necessary. It has to exceed what we did in the Sputnik years. It has to exceed the space race. It has to exceed the military race. If we do that, we'll find the battery storage. We'll find the cheap production of hydrogen. So I think there are clearly a whole set of things, not the least of which is global health, on which we will only survive and thrive on this planet if we coordinate multilaterally.
And he means governments. We are
Exactly.
already coordinating
Coordinate
multilaterally. That's what
What about
capitalism
Tina Turner?
is.
Yeah.
Capitalism is coordinating multilaterally. And
Yes.
it's what's been
Excellent point.
and that's what has been finding the battery capacity. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah, if you want to get electricity to those 9 billion people that he was talking about, you're going to have to unleash human ingenuity, which means unleashing the free market.
right. And the free market to people like John Kerry means he can award his brother-in-law or whoever, crony son of a bitch that he knows, a $5 billion contract, to dig holes in some village to get the fucking cobalt out, the son of a bitch.
Yeah. When people start talking about coordinating and mobilizing an effort on the scale of what was it he said?
Yes.
Space race or something.
Sputnik. He used the example of Sputnik.
Yeah. You're talking about government making people do things.
Right.
And you'd better make a damn compelling argument for that if you're going to convince me, and I'm pretty sure you too, Clyde.
Well, they're making a compelling argument to a lot of people by telling them that if we don't suck all this money out of the economy, if we don't reach our hands in both of your pockets, right, and not in a fun way, that the whole world's going to end.
Yeah.
I mean, that's their pitch.
Yeah, and it's based on computer models. It's not even based on data that indicates a imminent crisis breathing down our necks.
Even if it is, they have such a bad track record of solving problems. I don't want them anywhere near it. I'm sorry, I don't believe these people when they say they're concerned about the climate, right? I believe when you got Joe Liberal and whoever out on the street protesting, saying, "We've got to do something for climate change right now." I believe them. I believe that they believe that, and that they're sincere about that, and that they want to help. But John Kerry wants to get rich, right? John Kerry doesn't care about shit.
Yeah, the folks eating caviar and drinking Bordeaux in Davos and Paris and
I'd love to see John Kerry's carbon footprint for 1 year.
Yeah. You've got on the one hand the buy local people and we'll grow our own coffee in our apartment and have it for you the next morning. And then on the other hand, we've got to have a global effort to completely revamp the way corporations are formed and how distribution of goods around the world is done, and blah blah blah.
Right.
It's always somebody wanting to plan things for you, and which precludes your ability to exercise your own ingenuity and come up with something that's going to benefit humankind. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And they're gonna do the same thing with pharmaceutical prices when they put on price controls. They're going to see the same thing that happens with rent control. there's going to be less provided in the marketplace, and costs are going to go up. Even if the prices don't go up, the costs are going to go up. So the costs across the board are going to go up.
Yeah.
So maybe one particular drug cost goes down because it's forced down, but the rest of them are going to go up because the cost of business in general is going up. And as soon as you remove the American market, where all the European and Canadian drug manufacturers recoup their R&D costs, because they can actually sell their products at market value here, and once they've recouped their R&D costs, they can sell them in Europe and Canada at the government set controlled price. Once you lose America, drug prices and drug availability is gonna tank for the rest of the world. They're going to see higher prices and lower availability and lower research and development, and these people are disgusting.
Yeah. So one to watch, all you folks out there, the Great Reset.
The Great Reset.
The hair on the back of your neck ought to stand up when you hear that.
I know we're running short on time, so I won't read this article as I was planning to, but I'll put it in the show notes. I want you to read from Time Magazine. It's 2023. Here's how we fix the global economy. And I tell you what, do it on an empty stomach, because you will lose your lunch.
Well, listen, as we said earlier in the show, chime in. We want to make this a community, and we want you to interact and chime in on the comment thread at our YouTube channel or our Facebook page. Email us.
Mm-hmm. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/BarneyandClyde.
Concur with us. Pick. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, absolutely.
But subscribe to all those feeds.
Subscribe to us. How much we appreciate you. Yeah.
Subscribe to us on YouTube. Subscribe to us on Facebook, like our Facebook page. We have we're sharing on Parler now. Say what you want to about Parler. I don't give a fuck what your opinion is. Just go there and keep up with us if you want to. If you don't, find some other place. We do Twitter also. So if you want to follow us, there's plenty of ways to do that. We'd appreciate likes, shares, retweets, reparlays, whatever. Every little bit counts, and we're enormously grateful for any amount of elbow grease that you can put into this project. Okay?
You bet. And we do this fortnightly and forthrightly, so we'll see you again in 2 weeks. And until then, stay vigilant about your freedom.
Well, that's an interesting development.